mom friends, welcome back to my channel, Home and Arrows. My name is Shirley and I'm a homeschooling mom of 5 kids that I like to call my arrows. And today I'm looking forward to sitting down and chatting with you about some of my personal favorite books. Some of them are favorite books of all time. Some of them are books that I have just recently read and found. So stick around as I chat with you today about some of my personal favorite books. So I know that as a mom, it can be really challenging and sometimes pretty hard to find the time to just sit down and read a book. I know that when I was a kid, I was a really avid reader. I loved and have always loved reading. But I found that when I started having those babies and when they started coming right on top of each other, my husband and I, David, had 5 kids in under 6 years. And those years were so hard and challenging for me to find the time to sit down and read a book. It was like, yeah, right. So there's a season for all things, that was just not a season where I could find much time for reading. But now that my kids are older, it's a lot easier for me to carve out time. And for me, I have found that time to most likely happen in the mornings or in the evenings after they're in bed. And I really have to practice some self-discipline because the easy thing for me to do would be to watch a movie or watch a show or be on my phone at those times. But I know that reading is really good for me. And so I really try sometimes to be intentional to find a good book and to just carve out some time for reading. So I want to share with you all some books that I have loved for a long time, some that I have recently found, and I just want to share them with you today. So maybe you'll find something new and you can carve out some time for just some pleasure reading. All right, so here we go. I've kind of broken these books down into topics. I literally just have a stack of books here to my left. So I'm just gonna pull from that stack and show you them as I go along. Okay, so the first book I want to share with you is a nonfiction book. It falls under the category of, on the spine, it says religion and inspiration. And I just read this book all the way through last summer, and it was amazing. The book is called The Hiding Place, and it is the true story of Corrie ten Boom. It takes place during World War II, who was a 50-something-year-old, never married woman who helped direct the underground system so that they could save a bunch of Jews. It is absolutely fascinating, heartbreaking, and inspiring, the things that this woman and her family went through to put their lives at risk for God's people. Such a good book, one of those that I found really, really hard to put down, and I just love a good true story. So The Hiding Place, totally recommend it. The next book I have kind of falls under the category of like self-maintenance, maybe, I don't know. I had seen the title of this book floating around a whole lot on Instagram. Even some YouTube people that I follow were talking about it. And I kept hearing people say things like, oh, I'm a 7 wing 4. Oh, I'm an 8. Or if you're wondering about my personality, I'm a 3. And I'd be like, what are they talking about? Until it all came full circle and I finally found somebody talk about the book that these personality kind of numbers correspond with or correlate with. And the book is called The Road Back to You. And this book is supposed to kind of bring some self-awareness to you about your personality and maybe why you behave the way that you do. It's kind of complicated. It's really going to be difficult for me to describe, but maybe you can Google it and do some research on it. But there are these numbers 1 through 9, and every single number has like different characteristics and personality traits. And you kind of read through all of those, you figure out what number you are, and then there'll be a whole chapter related to your number and kind of helping you dissect some things about your personality and help bring you some maybe understanding about why you are the way you are. I just kind of think that things like this are fascinating. Maybe you've taken some personality tests before in the past, and if you enjoy doing that, you'll really enjoy this book. So in case you're wondering, I am a number 1, and I haven't quite figured out my whole wing thing yet, but if you know about this book and you know about the Enneagram, I am a number 1. The next book that I want to share falls in the category of fiction novel reading. I read this book one time in college, and I lost it over the years. And recently I started thinking about it again, and I was trying to find a good book to read, something that was just totally and strictly pleasure reading. And I remembered this book that I loved, and I actually heard some friends talking about it again. I was like, oh my gosh, I remember loving that story. And so I went back to the Christian bookstore and I picked up a new copy of it. It's such an amazing book. It's called Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. And pretty much the premise of this story is based off of the story of Hosea in the Bible, where God asks him to marry a prostitute. And I don't want to give any more away. There's some really intense moments in this book. It can be heartbreaking. It can touch some real sensitive issues and topics. It's just really, really good. That's all I can say. I promise if you get it, you will not want to put it down. It's kind of a thick book. If you ever find yourself with like a weekend where you don't have much to do, I cannot recommend Redeeming Love enough. So good. The next book I want to share with you is a parenting book. I thought there have been so many great parenting books that I've read, books that help you know how to discipline and train your children. And I think that if I had to pick a top favorite for me, it would be this one, Shepherding a Child's Heart by Ted Tripp. The thing that I love about this book is that it resonates deeply with me because I am not just trying to raise good kids. I'm trying to raise godly kids. And I've said that before in other videos, and it's the truth. And I love that in this book, he brings up the topic of not just addressing our kids' outward behavior. We don't want kids who are just outwardly doing the right thing and their hearts being a hot mess inside. This book addresses, hey, let's tackle and get to the heart issue of why our children are responding the wrong way outwardly. Let's get to the heart issue and address that instead of just addressing and correcting the outward behavior that we see. And I love how he encourages parents to be the ones to have their children's hearts. Because if we have our children's hearts, then we have the ability to be the greatest influences and influencers in our children's lives. So if you're looking for a great book on how to discipline, train, and teach your child, the book Shepherding a Child's Heart by Ted Tripp is super, super good. Next, for those of you, and maybe it's not many of you, but maybe the few of you that like poetry, one of my favorite, just kind of sit down in the fall and in the winter by the fireplace with a mug full of hot cocoa books is this book, Ruth Bell Graham's collected poems. If you don't know who Ruth Bell Graham is, she was from a missionary family that did missions work in China, and she went on in her later years to meet the Dr. Reverend Billy Graham in college. She went on to marry him. They went on to have 5 children together, and maybe that's why I find her so inspiring to me. Her writing, many people do not know. She was an excellent writer and wrote amazing, amazing poetry in her lifetime. And so they've collected all of those poems that she's written. She goes through like her lifespan. You can see poetry in there from her years where she met Billy, through the years where she married him and where they were newlyweds. You can then see how her poetry changes when she became a mother. And then in her later years where her children started to kind of fly the nest, and when she started to enter the fall and the winter seasons of her life and how her poetry changed. It's literally a lifetime of her poetry. And I just adore and can relate with and resonate with her poetry so, so much. So this is kind of comfort reading for me. So if you like poetry, check out Ruth Bell Graham's collected poems. And lastly, I have been asked before, what are some of your favorite books on motherhood? And there are so many, and I'd love to hear in the comments below what some of your favorite books are. So this is really hard for me to kind of narrow down, but rather than narrowing it down to just one book, I decided to go with one author who has authored so many books on motherhood that I absolutely adore, and that is Sally Clarkson. She has way more books out there than I even have. There are some that I'm like still really wanting to buy, like The Ministry of Motherhood, The Mission of Motherhood, I think is another one. But the ones I do have are The Life-Giving Home by Sally Clarkson and so good and so inspiring. And The Life-Giving Table, so good. And there's another book by her and her husband, Clay Clarkson, called Educating the Wholehearted Child. This book is excellent. It's so much information. I actually haven't gone through the whole thing. I literally will read a page or two with my highlighter and get so hung up. I'll be like, oh my gosh, that's so good. Oh my gosh, that's so good. But it's taken me forever to get through this book. But what I have covered has been really good material. So this is a really great book on homeschooling, and her books on motherhood, you guys, they're just so good. If you go to Amazon, you can just type in Sally Clarkson, and she's just authored so many fantastic books on motherhood. I can't recommend them enough. So moms, I hope that you've had a good time just hanging out with me, chatting about some of my favorite books. I would love to know what some of your favorite books are in the comments. And hopefully you found something in what I've shown you that will be inspiring and a good read for you. So make sure you try to carve out some time, Mom, for reading, especially if it's something you love doing. And again, thanks so much for watching and for commenting and for subscribing. It is always so appreciated. All right, mamas, I hope you have a great week with your kiddos, and I hope you find the time to read a good book. I'll see you next time. Bye.